Husband manipulated everyone against me, took my daughters, and left me homeless, but I fought back and finally reclaimed my life. 10 years ago this very month, my world turned upside down. I grew up with narcissistic parents who abused me physically, psychologically, and emotionally for as long as I can remember. Shame and blame were my constant companions. My parents worked tirelessly to persuade me that I was the architect of my own pain. I brought it on myself. In their eyes, I deserved every bit of cruelty they inflicted. Those messages etched themselves into my bones, and by the time I reached adulthood, I did what so many other survivors of this cycle do. I chose a partner who seemed safe only because his form of abuse was familiar, just more insidious and deeply psychological. I always sensed he wasn't good for me, but that no good felt like home. Control was all I'd known, so letting him hold the reins of my life felt like the norm, almost like safety. We married, had 2 beautiful little girls, 1 and 3 when everything came crashing down. My husband convinced me my place was at home as a wife and mother. I adored those roles, but that security he offered was really confinement. I was told I couldn't hold a job because I was too crazy and unstable, a struggle rooted in the effects of my childhood abuse, something I only understand in hindsight. According to him, he'd care for me, so there was no reason for me to have access to the bank account. He'd provide any money I needed. We sold my car because I supposedly couldn't be trusted to drive. He'd take me everywhere I needed to go. It sounds sick now, but being controlled was all I'd ever known, and back then, it felt safer than the unknown. Then I caught him cheating. Twice. Both times, my pain was met with the same twisted logic I was raised with. He blamed his actions on me, justifying everything with my supposed failures. Growing up, that had been my normal. I accepted all responsibility, determined to fix myself so he wouldn't do it again. I poured myself into motherhood and housework, sought fulfillment in raising my daughters, and tried to push away the gut-wrenching reality that if I picked up his iPad, I'd see he'd never stop cheating. But one day, I did look. And something inside me snapped. I was postpartum, swirling in chaos and hormones, but I finally told him his choices were his own, and for the first time, I meant it. He grudgingly agreed to counseling. But even there, I got thrust back into old patterns. From a young age, my parents had weaponized mental health professionals against me, painting me as the problem, the scapegoat, always to be blamed and fixed. Therapists had handed me one false diagnosis after another, none ever true, forced medications that helped nothing. Now, all over again, our marriage therapist instantly sided with him. Once more, blame landed on me. I didn't push back. Suddenly, everything became about diagnosing and medicating me, fixing me before we could address our marriage. The new meds made me worse, more unstable, desperate, out of control, yet I was told to keep taking them, that my emotions were my fault, my inability to forgive my husband was the true problem, and that I needed to work harder to satisfy his needs as if that explained his cheating. In that desperate haze, I bent over backward. I consented to intimate online acts in an attempt to attract him. I suggested opening our marriage to polygamy, hoping maybe other women would hold his interest where I could not. Anything to keep our family intact. I made one request. If we were to have a polygamous arrangement, I wanted it to be based on relationships, sister-wife style, not cold, casual encounters. He could choose anyone, I would support him. It wasn't enough. Even with those boundaries, he sought anonymous flings online. When I found proof yet again, I finally snapped. I told him our marriage was over, and unlike all the times before, this wasn't a threat. I meant it. He was ready. He refused to leave, intimidating and threatening me until I was forced to call the police. He left only when escorted, shouting at me, "Good luck paying the bills without me." And then reality crashed around me. I'd made a fatal error in trusting him with full financial control. He'd blown all our money on sex workers and hadn't paid our rent in 2 months. Eviction notices began to arrive, bills were unpaid, and I sat there with no car, no job, and no access to a single dollar. He'd kept me precisely where he wanted me, powerless. But I was done. I insisted on ending the marriage. That's when he played his most insidious card, triangulation. Unless you've lived through it, the skill people like him have for manipulation is impossible to describe. He spun a web of lies, reaching out to everyone, my parents, never a resource, just a source of pain, women I trusted in the community, friends I'd confessed in. He told them I'd been cheating on him, showed them screenshots of my online sexual attempts to please him, claimed I'd secretly done sex work behind his back, and insisted I was on drugs, the psych medications I'd been forced to take in counseling, and that I'd relapsed on alcohol, though I was 5 years sober and, through all of this, hadn't touched a drop. He painted me as a danger to the children, and said they needed to be protected from me. One by one, people I thought I could count on turned against me. Everyone had always seen us as the perfect family, orchestrated by him, the saintly husband, the strong protector who spun my craziness as his burden. The elaborate act of keeping me at home? Suddenly it was to protect himself from me, not the other way around. Even my parents refused to help, I was on my own. Anyone I might have turned to had been convinced by his lies, especially the damning evidence of my desperate attempts at sex work. Everyone shouted at me, heaping shame onto me for being a disgusting housewife and mother. How could I stoop to such things, blind to the fact that it was all done to try and save my marriage, my family, myself? He even turned the landlord against me. The landlord called in a rage, berating me, hurling degrading insults. I was left shattered and alone, cut off from everyone and everything I'd once relied on. He wasn't paying for me, he'd already been put on notice, and yet he taunted me, almost laughing, "So how are you going to pay your rent? I hope your new line of work is going well, but it doesn't seem to be, from what I hear. Shame on you." I was unraveling, with no support. Not only was I battered, but people I once trusted allowed themselves to be gaslit by him. They turned their backs on me and sided with him. The overwhelm swallowed me, I couldn't stop crying. My money was gone, the house was empty of food, I had no way of getting to a grocery store even if I could afford it. I had no clue how food stamps worked, and the thought of walking into a welfare office filled me with dread. If I admitted I couldn't feed my kids, would they take them away? Then, just as suddenly as he'd torn my world apart, my husband glided back in, draped in a hero's guise. He handed me a bit of money, promised to take the girls for just a week so I could regain my footing and figure out how I was going to live. I was desperate. And I wanted to believe him so badly. So I let him take my children. That was the worst mistake of my life. The end of the week came and went. He didn't show up at the agreed upon time. I called. I texted. Nothing. I called and texted again, more and more frantically, and suddenly, I was blocked. Cold silence. I called the police, sure that somewhere, somehow, they would help. But I was wrong. They spelled it out for me in cold, bureaucratic terms, with no custody agreement in a separation like ours, either parent could take the kids and not give them back. They couldn't do a thing. I shattered. I lost control. I was calling and texting him nonstop, sometimes screaming, sometimes sobbing, begging, cursing, all of it, desperate for him to give back my children. He twisted this, of course. He sent those messages around to others, painting me as mentally unstable, deciding for everyone else that he had been right to take the girls away. And it didn't stop. He began driving up and down our street, over and over again, taking pictures. He'd park where I could see him and fire off a text, "This can all be over if you'll just take me back." When I refused, when I demanded he bring my daughters home, he escalated. "If you want to see them again, maybe you could provide me with some more personal company, under my supervision, of course." The threat was clear as glass. I became so terrified that I went to a neighbor's house and stayed the night. The next day, when I returned, everything had changed. Every door in the house had been kicked in and all the valuables were gone. Anything I could have possibly sold or pawned. It was a mess of chaos and loss, but this was the final straw. I managed to convince someone to drive me to the courthouse. I begged for my kids back and for a protection order. They gave them back to me. A police officer had to drop me off at home. But now I was truly alone, even deeper in despair, more broken than before, no food, no money, drifting apart at the seams. I called my parents, desperate, begging for help. Instead, they shamed me. How dare I take my children back? They parroted his stories, saying they'd seen pictures, how disgusting, depraved, unfit I was, they said. I was undeserving, unable even to feed them. No car, no job, no way to work, how selfish, how terrible you are to try to keep those children when you can't even care for them, they told me. There was one last person I could call, an older woman who'd been almost a surrogate mother to me. Though she, too, had been triangulated into shaming me by him, I called anyway. I pleaded with her. She came, acting kind and gentle, soothing me, promising help. But the help she offered turned out to be nothing of the sort. She sat with me, worked her poison, convinced me that I was everything my parents accused me of being, an unfit mother. My husband deserved the girls, I needed to be in a mental hospital. I was so broken that I agreed. She took my children and my small dog, dropped them off with my husband, and drove me 2 hours away, past a hospital near my home, to one much farther away. There was a reason for this. By the time we arrived, my spirit was shattered. When the intake staff asked me questions, I just stared at the ground. She answered for me, told me what to say, and I repeated it. Among other things, she told me to claim I was a drug addict. They put me in a room. The woman stayed by my side until a nurse asked to speak with me alone. She bristled, insisted she should stay, but the nurse held firm and forced her out. The nurse sat quietly with me, and then another nurse joined us. They must have sensed something was wrong, because the nurse who escorted the woman out stayed just outside, observing. The nurse questioned me, "That woman is on the phone with your husband in the hallway. Are you still with him, or are you trying to leave?" I told her, "I'm doing everything I can to leave him." She explained that the woman and my husband had told staff that we were still together, but that he was terrified for the safety of our children because I was supposedly a drug addict and unstable. I told her the truth. They drug tested me, I only tested positive for my prescribed medication, which they checked and confirmed. The nurse revealed that she'd overheard the woman plotting on the phone. She'd go through the house and document everything. No food, no milk, no diapers, since my husband had already taken all of that when he broke in. Their plan was to have me committed, call CPS, and discredit me completely. She even promised to pay for a lawyer for him. Worse, the nurse said, the way they talked, it sounded like the woman and my husband were in some sort of intimate relationship. My world tilted. He'd always had a thing for older women, but this? It left me numb. The nurse looked me in the eye. "You don't need a hospital," she said. "You're not crazy. They're trying to make you believe that. You're in a dangerous situation. Take the report we're preparing, go get another protective order, have the police take you to get your girls, and go to a women's shelter." I agreed. The woman marched back in. When she was told I wouldn't be committed, I saw a side of her that made my blood go cold. She exploded, yelling, screaming that I was a drug addict, unstable, crazy. When staff insisted that I wasn't and that she was being used as an instrument for domestic violence, she lost complete control, cursing the nurses out. More staff showed up, threatening her with jail if she didn't leave. She snapped, "Fine. I'm not taking her home with me. She's unstable, dangerous, a drug addict, I fear for my safety." With that, I was abandoned, 2 hours from home, no money, no way to get back. I called my parents, trying with all my remaining strength to be brave, and begged them for help. They literally screamed at me, just like the woman had, telling me I ought to be ashamed of myself, that I clearly needed professional help, accusing me of being on drugs. They berated me, "Am I really going to take my children to a women's shelter? That's disgusting, shame on you, you don't deserve children, you're disgusting." Over and over again, until they hung up on me. The nurses who witnessed all this were absolutely shocked. Out of kindness, they pooled together enough money for me to get a taxi home for a couple of hours. They handed me the report and urged me to do what they said, get my daughters and get to safety as soon as possible. I wish I could say I finally got home and listened to their advice, that I did what I needed to protect myself and my girls. But there truly aren't words to describe the absolute devastation I felt at that point. My abusive parents' voices, and the fresh cruelty from people I thought I could trust, echoed louder in my mind than my own. I was utterly broken. I believed every accusation and every cruel word thrown at me. Desperate and shattered, I sent out a goodbye text to everyone I loved, truly believing there was no way forward. I did something I intended to be permanent. The next thing I remember, I was in an ambulance, and then in the emergency room, and then in a mental hospital. He had finally broken me. He had finally won. It felt like the end, but in reality, it became the beginning of my healing and breaking free. For the first time, I received proper mental health care. Doctors discovered brain damage in my frontal lobe, something I'd suffered ever since I was 5 years old, when I'd been neglected, fell off a 6-foot concrete retaining wall, and landed headfirst on pavement. That injury had never been treated, and now, finally, they gave me medicine that began to work for the way my symptoms presented. For the first time, I felt stable. But my ex had made sure to finish the job. The woman filed a scathing CPS report on me. She even paid for my ex to get a lawyer, and together they used my hospitalization, and a million other manufactured stories, to go to court and rip my children away from me. My own parents stayed cold and cruel, telling me they certainly wouldn't help me with a lawyer, saying I didn't deserve those children, that they were better off with him, that I was unfit and would never be a good mother. With no one to help me, I went to court alone. He took 100% custody, every single right stripped away. I was granted supervised visitation at an organization that charged $200 for every 30-minute session, once a month. I couldn't even afford that. By 2013, I had relapsed into alcohol, abandoning all hope and nearly letting go of everything permanently again. But in 2016, something inside me refused to die. I returned to my program, and this time I stayed. I fought to reclaim my life from the very bottom. I built years of sobriety. I worked every step of my program. I went back to school, finished my master's degree, got my teaching license, became truly independent, found my own place, paid my bills. All the while, I never stopped fighting the cruel man who tried to keep my children from me. I started my fight in 2016, and by 2018, I had full physical custody. For the first time in years, he only had weekends. I kept working on my wounds. Healing is a lifelong journey, and I'm still traveling it, but I can say with pride that I healed enough so that the next relationship I entered was with someone healthy. We've been married now for over 5 years. My girls call him Dad. Now, I'm a housewife, because I love it, and I teach online. I survived. I reclaimed my life. And I am still healing, every single day. Update 1. I never thought I'd write an update that starts with this. Today, my daughters legally became ours. Let me back up a second, because the road from I survived to we're truly free took turns I didn't see coming, and it's the new twist that I think will resonate with anyone who's ever been told their reality didn't count. The girls are 11 and 13 now. They are exactly who they were always meant to be when the noise falls away. One is a walking sparkler with a drum kit and a heart that insists stray animals belong at our house. The other is a quiet sniper with words who writes poetry so beautiful it makes teachers cry. They have a dad who shows up, my husband, the good man I married 5 years ago, and a home that is neither perfect nor quiet but deeply safe. But last fall, my ex did what abusers so often do when control slips. He filed for a custody modification and accused me of parental alienation. He claimed I'd turned the children against him. He wanted 50-50 back. If you've lived this, your stomach probably just dropped, because you know how weaponized that phrase is against protective parents. He'd been doing the slow burn sabotage for a while. Forgetting pickup times. Telling the girls I was keeping his money when child support was garnished. Buying them inappropriate things as gifts and then threatening to take them back if they didn't tell him everything about our house. He broke our boundaries constantly, texting them late when they were with me, grilling them about whether my husband tucked them in. When our older daughter asked him to stop using their conversations as ammunition, he told her she'd regret choosing sides. When he filed, I felt the old cold hand close around my throat. I remembered the years I spent being called crazy and the way the courtroom can feel like a stage you're not allowed to speak on. I am not the woman I was then. We documented everything. Every missed handoff, every hostile message, every appointment he skipped out on, every time the girls came home crying, because of something he said. Their therapist, someone I chose with painstaking care, kept neutral, detailed notes. We were ready for a fight. Then something happened I still don't have words for without goosebumps. I got an email from a woman with the hospital system where that first nurse saw through the setup all those years ago. The subject line said, "We remember you." She explained that when I'd been brought in by that older woman, a social worker had opened an internal incident report for third-party coercion. It had sat in a digital file with my name on it all this time. The nurse who pulled me into a private room had retired, but before she did, she'd actually written a formal affidavit, because she couldn't stop thinking about my case. The hospital's legal counsel had approved releasing it to me since my name was on the file and my signature had been the one authorizing the report. "We heard from a former staffer that you were fighting in family court," the email said. "We wanted you to have this." I printed the report, hands shaking. Line after line laid out what that nurse had overheard in the hallway, the older woman's phone call with my ex, strategies to get me committed, a plan to sweep my house and stage it for CPS, the exact wording to use so it sounded like concern, and the sentence that made me feel nauseous. He said he would make sure the children never see her again and that he had the whole town believing she was a drug addict. I cried until my eyes hurt. Not because I needed the validation, I know what happened to me, but because something objective, something institutional and indifferent and boring and bureaucratic, finally put into words, "You weren't crazy. You were targeted." We brought that report to my lawyer, who grinned the kind of grin I wish I'd seen on my own face 10 years ago. "This changes things," she said. "This is not just he said, she said. This is a contemporaneous, third-party, professional statement. And it explains the pattern that followed." There was still more. 2 weeks before the hearing, a message popped up in my Facebook other inbox from the older woman who helped him. I'll call her Elle. I hadn't seen or heard from her since the hospital. All I knew was that she had become a specter in my story, someone whose betrayal, at a mother level, had carved a canyon. Her message was brief: "I'm sick, I need to tell you the truth." I met her, but not alone. I brought my husband, and we met at a coffee shop at noon on a Saturday with people around and a clear exit plan. I set boundaries with my therapist before I went, and I sat where I could see the door. She looked smaller. Not physically, spiritually. She clutched a manila envelope like it might float her. "I'm sorry," she said right away, before she even sat down. "I'm so sorry. I let him make a fool of me. I wanted to believe I was helping. I wasn't. I hurt you and your girls because he told me I was saving them. He told me you were on meth, that you were shaking in the house with knives on the counter. He said he had proof. He said everything you already know." She slid the envelope across the table. Inside was a spiral notebook with dates and notes in her handwriting, printouts of emails, and a crude script for what she'd planned to say to CPS. There were also text screenshots between her and my ex, some of which I recognized the shape of, his rhythms, his grammar. Things like, "Make sure you describe the fridge. Don't say I said it. Say you saw it. If she gets out, call me. We'll file emergency. I'll bring the girls to you for a bit, it will keep her frantic." One voicemail was him: "If she gives you trouble, tell her you'll keep the dog. She cares about the dog more than anything." I didn't realize my hands were shaking until my husband put his on mine. I asked her why she was bringing it to me now. She told me she'd been diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. Her church had a new pastor who'd told a sermon about making amends, really making amends, by fixing what you broke, not just apologizing for the breaking. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said. "I do deserve to tell the truth. If you need me to show up in court, I will. If you never want to see me again, I understand." I don't have a pretty, Instagrammable wrap-up to that conversation. I didn't absolve her. I didn't scream, either. I asked for her to write a statement and give me permission to subpoena every last piece of it. She nodded. Then she took my hands and said, "Please tell your daughters I'm sorry." I told her I would when it was right. The hearing came. The therapist, the guardian ad litem, and our older daughter were all scheduled. In the hallway, my ex smirked at me with that old smirk that used to undo me. He was wearing a new watch. My stomach tried to crawl into my throat and hide. The judge, new to us, and, as luck and grace would have it, someone who'd attended a state training on coercive control I spoke at last year, called our case. Yes, that happened. One of the women in my recovery community had connected me to a coalition that trains family court professionals about how abusers use systems. I'd told my story with anonymized details. I never imagined the judge in our case would be in that room. But there we were. My ex went first. He cried on cue. He talked about losing his girls. He said I poisoned them. Then my lawyer stood and did not flinch. She laid out the timeline like a metronome, how he isolated me, the hospital report, the CPS call that followed, my hospitalization, the custody that he got when I had no representation and no money, my recovery, the years of steady, boring, documented parenting, the missed weekends and manipulations, the incident where he texted our 13-year-old at 10 p.m. demanding she come outside to talk alone and she stood at the window and cried instead. She entered into evidence screenshots of texts where he told our daughter to delete this because your mom will make it a thing, and the printout of L's messages where he planned the original setup, and the hospital affidavit. My older daughter asked to speak to the judge in chambers. The court agreed. They let the guardian ad litem go in with her. I sat on that bench with my heart in my shoes, staring at the wood grain on the door, feeling like every mother who ever lived was sitting there with me. When our daughter came out, she was dry-eyed and long-limbed and ancient in a way that broke me and made me proud all at once. The gal put a hand on my shoulder and I will never forget the kindness in it. She did good, she said. She was clear. The judge took a long breath. He said he had read our case file 3 times. He said, this court is familiar with coercive control tactics. This court is not inclined to reward them. He denied my ex's motion for 50-50. He reduced his time. Supervised visits, at his expense. He put in writing that any and all communication had to go through our family wizard. He reprimanded him for contacting the children directly and for using the girls as messengers. He ordered him into a parenting class and individual therapy. He made it explicit that he was not to show up at our home, our work, or the girls' schools. My ex threw a fit in the hallway bad enough that the bailiff walked him out. 2 days later, he violated the order with a series of messages to our older daughter about how evil courts are and how I had stolen her. We sent it straight to the attorney and the gal. The judge set a quick contempt hearing. He was sanctioned and warned that the next violation would result in suspension. He violated again. By Christmas, his visits were paused pending compliance. By February, he had stopped paying his share for supervision and then stopped showing up at all. I expected to feel triumphant. I felt tired. A bone-deep, ancient tired, the kind of tired that accumulates in the muscles of people who've had to survive by staying 3 steps ahead just to be believed. This is where my daughters did what daughters in safe homes can do. They told us what they wanted. They both asked my husband if he would adopt them. He cried. I cried. The dog wagged. We told them we would only proceed if it was what they wanted a year from now, too, because these decisions are big and permanent and not about sticking it to anyone. They didn't waver. We spoke with our attorney. In our state, a step-parent adoption requires either the consent of the other parent or a finding that terminating their parental rights is in the children's best interest due to abandonment, failure to support, or egregious misconduct. We had months of missed visits, non-payment, contempt, and a judge's findings about coercive control. The girls were over 12, and their preferences had weight. The gal supported us, so did their therapist, who wrote a careful letter describing the harm of the ongoing contact. We filed in April. My ex fought it. He filed a response accusing me of turning the girls into rebels and claiming he'd always been there. Then, 3 weeks before the hearing, his attorney called mine with a proposal I had been warned might come. He'd consent to the termination if we agreed to waive arrears and future support. We talked for a long time, my husband and I, and with the girls' therapist about the ethics of that. Ultimately, after years of trying to separate money and freedom, we chose freedom. A check can get you groceries tomorrow. Peace gets you your life. We agreed. I signed the final documents at our kitchen table with the plan I've kept alive for 3 years standing between us like a little green sentinel. The girls read them over my shoulder. My husband signed and then went into the yard and sat on the grass and put his head in his hands. This morning, we went to the courthouse with the silliest, sweetest troop you've ever seen, our daughters in the dresses they chose, my husband in a suit with socks the dog had chewed the heel out of, me in the same necklace I was wearing the day I left. The judge had a small basket of stuffed animals on the bench, apparently he keeps them for adoptions, and he asked the girls their favorite foods, and what they loved about our family. Our older daughter said, I love that we talk about everything. Our younger one said, I love that we always go back and get the fries we forgot. Everyone laughed. I cried. We took the picture in front of the seal, and the bailiff whispered, good job, Mom. On the way home, we stopped for pancakes and everyone ordered whipped cream. At a red light, our 13-year-old reached forward and squeezed my shoulder. It's over, she said. I looked at her in the mirror and realized she meant the thing I hadn't even let myself imagine could end. The part where the phone ringing spikes your heart rate. The part where a judge's schedule can make or break your week. The part where someone who broke you when you were young could still break you as a mother. It's not magically gone. Trauma doesn't evaporate because a gavel falls. I still wake up sometimes in the grip of an old panic and have to orient myself. What year? What house? What sound was that? But now I can roll over and feel my husband's breath on my back and the dog starfished between us because she is rude, and I can listen for the particular silence of a house that belongs to you. The girls will be in therapy for as long as they need and then some. We still do the boring, steady work that actually builds a life. There were other small miracles along the way that deserve mention because sometimes the universe cracks a window even when you think you've sealed yourself in. The landlord from back then, The one who screamed at me over the phone when my ex spun the story, found me through an old mutual friend and asked to meet. I didn't know him a thing. I went anyway. He apologized. He told me my ex fell behind with him too and left him with thousands in repairs. He brought a letter he wrote for the court describing my ex's behavior at the time, including the calls he made bragging about teaching her a lesson. We didn't end up needing it, but the apology mattered. The state coalition I mentioned invited me to testify in a committee hearing on a bill recognizing coercive control and protective orders. I was not the hero of that room, there were so many of us, but I was one voice. The bill advanced. If it helps one mother not be told to calm down when she brings in a stack of weird, controlling texts, it's worth every adrenaline spike I felt at that microphone. One of the women my ex used to triangulate me, the community leader who called me disgusting over the phone, showed up at a talk I gave at a local college on trauma-informed classrooms. She waited until everyone left, and then she said 3 words I never expected from her: I was wrong. I didn't become her friend. I did accept the apology as a way to set a piece of the past down. Elle, the older woman, kept her promise. She made a sworn statement. She passed away in July. She mailed my daughters 2 letters beforehand. We haven't given them yet, we will when their therapist says the time is right. I don't know what he told her that kept her locked in that lie. I do know that her cowardice then doesn't cancel out her courage at the end. Both things are true at once. There was a time when any one of these paragraphs would have been the only thing my heart could hold. Now they are part of a larger, ordinary picture. The real update is that our house is obnoxiously normal. There are shoes in a pile by the door and glitter in our butter for reasons no one will confess to. There are bats outside because my younger daughter insisted we build a bat house and now our backyard looks like a tiny gothic Airbnb. There are school projects taped to the microwave. There are dinner fights about who hates broccoli and who hates dishes. There are text threads about whether we have almond milk. There are long car rides to therapy and orthodontist appointments, and there is a playlist the older one curated called Songs That Feel Like Sunlight that we blast on the way home. And yes, there are nights when the dark comes in crooked and I sit on the back steps and think about that girl I was at 20-something, out of money, with the doors kicked in and the light gone out of her. I want to scoop her up. I want to tell her, you will get a report from a nurse who saw you. You will get a bench of justice that actually listens. Your children will choose safety. The thing he told you would define you forever will be something you talk about in rooms full of women who take each other's hands. Your family will not look like you were told it should. It will be better. I don't know where you are when you're reading this. Maybe you're still in the house. Maybe you're on the courthouse steps with your arms shaking so hard you can't sign your name. Maybe your body keeps telling you you're not safe even when your head tries to insist you are. I won't wrap this with a bow. But I will tell you the truest thing I know now. They can be good at the lying. They can be good at making everyone around you think you're the problem. They can take so much from you. They cannot take away the possibility that tomorrow you will take one small step they didn't see coming. And sometimes, 10 years after you thought it was over but not really over, you will stand in a courtroom and say yes when a judge asks if you want your daughters to be known, forever, on paper and in the world, as members of the family you chose. You will walk out into bright daylight and buy pancakes with extra whipped cream because you can. You'll drive home and your teenager will say it's over and the words will ring true for the first time.